Hi, and welcome to the Mystery of Anastasia. This is the story of Anastasia Romanov, a Grand Duchess from Russia, and the disappearance of her and her family during the Russian Revolution of 1917. You'll see how evidence uncovered years after her disappearance was used to piece together what happened to her and her family. Here's a photograph of Anastasia with her father, Tsar Nicholas, her mother, the Tsarina Alexandra, and her siblings. Her father, Tsar Nicholas, had inherited the throne from his family before him. His wife, Alexandra, was a member of the English royal family but grew up in Germany. Anastasia was the youngest of 5 children. She had 3 older sisters, Maria, Tatiana, and Olga, and one little brother, Alexei, who was the heir to the throne. In 1917, Vladimir Lenin staged an uprising against the Tsar and the monarchy. When this began, he managed to force the Tsar to give up his power and abdicate his throne, and had the royal family removed from their home in St. Petersburg. When this took place, the Russian Revolution of 1917 began. This went on for about a year and a half, and the supporters of the Tsar were fighting Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks in their attempt to take over and turn Russia into a communist country. While the revolution was taking place and there were battles in St. Petersburg, the royal family was put on a train and shipped off to Siberia. They were kept hiding. We know that at one point by 1918, they were living in this house in Yekaterinburg. Reports surfaced that some of them had been identified at this location. The White Army that supported the Tsar and his return to power started to march up to Yekaterinburg to find the family. By the time anyone arrived, the royal family was no longer there, but some of their belongings were found in the home, evidence that they had been living there. Instead of finding the family, there was a room in the basement that looked like this. Guns had been fired, there were bullet holes in the walls, blood, even a piece of a finger was found at this grisly crime scene. So it looked as if maybe the family had been killed at this house. But the only way to prove for sure that the royal family had met their demise at this house in Siberia was to find their bodies. No bodies were recovered in the house. There was a search in the surrounding village and in the forests. Nothing turned up. So based on the evidence that the family had been living at this house and this scene found in the basement, the general conclusion was that the royal family had been murdered at the hands of the Bolsheviks. Vladimir Lenin went on to win the Russian Revolution, and this is when Russia became the Soviet Union. Rumors persisted for quite some time after word spread that the family had died, that maybe there were some survivors, that maybe at least some of the children were spared. And there were particularly rumors swirling around Anastasia's sightings around places in Siberia. In 1920, a woman turned up in Germany. Now, this may seem disconnected, but pay attention, this is important. This woman was found in a canal under a bridge. She had thrown herself off the bridge and was recovered from the waters below, brought to a hospital, but in the hospital would not tell anyone anything about herself, where she came from, even a name. So she started to be known as Miss Unknown. And because of her accent, the assumption was she was likely a Russian refugee. Now, this did not make the newspapers. Unfortunately, at this time in 1920, post-revolution, a lot of people were fleeing the Soviet Union, refugees looking for new places to live. So for about a year and a half, Miss Unknown lived at a hospital and finally decided to confide in someone at the hospital who she was. Now hold on to your seats. Miss Unknown told someone at the hospital that she was Anastasia Romanov, the youngest daughter of the Tsar, who everyone thought had died during the Russian Revolution. Shocking, right? Well, what do you think the reaction was? Considering the circumstances of her finding and the fact that she didn't talk for so long, a lot of people thought that she was a fraud, that Miss Unknown was trying to become famous or to get an inheritance, and that this was all a hoax. But there was still hope that maybe she was telling the truth, that she was indeed the Grand Duchess Anastasia, and she had survived the massacre. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? As word spread through Russia, it leaked through Europe, and cousins of Anastasia wanted to meet this woman who claimed to be their cousin. They rushed to her bedside, and they too weren't sure. But there was a lot of compelling evidence that led many people to believe that she might actually be telling the truth. As the story progressed, Miss Unknown's name changed. She started to go by the name of Anna Anderson, and this is a name that she chose herself in order to maintain anonymity as she traveled around the world. Now, what kind of evidence could have been used to prove if this woman, Anna Anderson, really is indeed the princess, Anastasia Romanov? Don't forget, this was in the early 1920s, so a lot of the evidence we see on TV shows like CSI, including DNA evidence, was not possible. There was some physical evidence collected that was quite intriguing. For example, Anna Anderson was covered in scars. She had marks all over her body. And some thought that maybe that was the result of being held captive by Bolshevik soldiers during the Russian Revolution. In fact, one of the scars on her foot looked like it was from a bayonet, which is a weapon that Russian soldiers like the Bolsheviks used to carry. She was the same height as the princess, same hair, same eye color. So a lot of physical similarities. She even had a damaged finger, just like the princess, which was something the cousins were quite interested in. When they met with her, they interviewed her, asked her questions, things that maybe no one else would know but someone in the family. She was able to identify some people in pictures, including a tutor that the royal family had back in the early 1900s, but didn't come through 100%. The cousins left feeling unsettled and unsure that this woman, Anna Anderson, really truly was a member of the royal family. And they eventually produced a statement publicly denouncing her, saying that they believed that Anna Anderson was a fraud. Anna Anderson went on with a lawsuit. She decided to sue the family when she was of age for her inheritance. And in the lawsuit, she was asked by the judge to provide evidence. The judge reiterated what the family said, that there wasn't enough evidence to prove that she was indeed Anastasia Romanov. And if she was able to provide evidence to the courts to prove with certainty that she was, then she would receive an inheritance. So I'm going to show you a few more pieces of evidence beyond some of the physical evidence that had already been collected that was used to figure out whether or not this mysterious woman really was being truthful. At the very start of the court case, an interesting article came out in a newspaper in Germany. And the journalist claimed that Anna Anderson was a liar and that he had figured out who she really was. This is a picture of who the journalist thought she really was, Franziska Schanzkowska. These are the only photographs of Franziska that exist or that we know about. And she was a Polish factory worker who left her village around 1920 to live in a boarding house in Berlin, Germany. Her family reported that she disappeared from her boarding house and no one knew where she was. And the timing of her disappearance is what's important. It coincides with when Anna Anderson was pulled from the canal in Berlin. So here we have one mysterious woman disappearing from her home, never to be seen again, and another woman seemingly appearing out of nowhere. Maybe Anna Anderson is Franziska. It seems like a stretch, right? But there was another interesting thing about Franziska that came out in this article. She worked in a factory where they had explosives. They were making things like grenades. And apparently there was an accident in the factory, and Franziska was very close to an explosion, and as a result, was covered in burns and scars all over her body. Do you remember who else had burns and scars all over her body? Anna Anderson's body was scarred in many places. So the journalist concluded that because she was covered in scars and because of the timing, that it looked like Anna Anderson was probably this woman, Franziska. Somewhat compelling. It did come out later on that the article was paid for. The journalist was paid by the royal family. So it seemed as if they were trying to put things in the media that would prove that this woman, Anna Anderson, wasn't telling the truth. So it doesn't sound like the article carried much weight. But let's look at some of the evidence that came forth in the court case. We'll see if you're compelled. A handwriting analysis was conducted. Now, you're probably wondering, how did they get Anastasia's handwriting? Well, she left behind diaries. So they were very easily able to extract bits and pieces of her handwriting from before her disappearance. And then Anna Anderson very easily provided samples to the experts. Now, in handwriting analysis, you're never looking for an exact match. If you think about it, if you wrote your name 10 times on a piece of paper, it would probably be slightly different every time. What you're looking for are things that remain consistent, things like the way that letters are shaped, the way they begin and end. And here we see Anastasia's and Anna Anderson's handwriting side by side. This is looks like a cursive letter B and then an I and the letters U and D, maybe from the word understand. Side by side, they look very similar and there are some consistencies. Now, the handwriting experts for this court case looked at far more than what we're looking at today. And their conclusion was that it was a reasonable match. It looked like Anna Anderson's handwriting could match or be considered a match with Anastasia's. Good evidence? Pretty good. So it was added to the collecting pile of evidence. Here's another odd thing they did. They looked at their ears. So your ear shape is unique, just like a fingerprint. No two people have the same exact ear shapes, even identical twins. So the first task was finding photographs of Anastasia's ear, profile pictures, that could be matched up with photographs of Anna Anderson's. Now, for my example here, the photographs that we're going to look at are not the photographs that were used in the real analysis. So the quality isn't going to be the best, but bear with me, this is interesting. Here's a photo of Anastasia as a young girl with her ear in profile. And here's a photograph of Anna Anderson, much older, with a profile photo also. Does it matter that there's such a difference in their ages? Actually, it does not. After a few years of age, your ear shape is set for the rest of your life. So it shouldn't matter the age of the person whose ear you're examining. I'm going to click compare here and take a closer look. Now, again, these photographs are not the photos that were used in the real analysis, but just looking at them side by side, would you say they look close? I agree. I see some slight differences. Now let's look a little bit closer. What we can do is slide one ear photo over the other. And when we do it this way, it's a bit more compelling. It's a lot easier to see the similarities and differences. And to be honest, I see a lot of similarities. In the court case, the ears were given a score on a scale of 1 to 5. A 5 means that the ears are exactly the same, and a 1 would mean they're completely different. One of the ear comparisons was given a score of 4 out of 5. That's a pretty decent score. But if you're the judge, is a 4 enough? Unfortunately, it's not. And this seemed to be how the court case proceeded for a long time until the judge finally said, "I'm sorry, but I've not seen any evidence that convinces me 100% that you're being truthful about your identity. And I've not seen any evidence that convinces me 100% that you're not the princess. As a result, or that you are the princess, I'm sorry. As a result, the court case was dismissed." Anna Anderson wound up moving to the United States and marrying a college professor, and she spent the rest of her adult life in Virginia. She lived until she was in her early 80s. She had a very quiet life and never had any children. There are very few photos of her later in life and very few interviews for that matter also. In fact, she lived her life almost like a hermit, very rarely leaving, very rarely granting interviews. And in the interviews that I've seen, she's quite bitter that she was dismissed the way that she was. And to the day she died, claimed that she was being truthful and was indeed the Grand Duchess Anastasia. So it's a bit of a sad story, but this is not the end of the story. After Anna Anderson's death in the early 1980s, there was another revolution, and the Soviet Union became Russia again. When this happened, documentation was found that led the Russian government to the place where the bodies had been buried. Yes, it was a logbook left behind by a Bolshevik soldier where everything that had happened to the royal family was documented. It said when the family was taken away from their home, all the places that they were taken, and how they were killed at the house in Yekaterinburg that I showed you earlier. But most important, it said what happened with the bodies. They were buried in a mine shaft in Siberia. This is a picture of the location where they were found. So in 1991, To have some closure, the Russian government organized a group to go to Siberia and exhume the mine shaft, to exhume the grave, and to confirm that the royal family was indeed killed and buried back in 1918. So what we're going to do now is take a look at what was found in the grave. This is actually a drawing of how the bodies were found in the grave, not very carefully buried, and a list of the people who should be in the grave. So according to the document that was found, the Tsarina, all 4 of her daughters, including Anastasia and a nurse, should be in the grave, so that would be 6 females. And the father, Tsar Nicholas, his son, Alexei, a doctor, and 2 servants should be in the grave also, 5 males. So question number 1 is, were all 11 people in the grave? So I'm going to take you through what was found in the grave. What we're going to do first is exhume the grave. So to exhume this grave, all I need to do is use my mouse. I can click the skeletons out. They'll be organized neatly beside the grave, and let's see if we actually have 11. Goodness, do you see what I see? It looks like we're missing 2 people. Well, this is what happened in real life. Only 9 bodies were found in this grave. So the remains of 2 people are missing. Now, this could mean that we have the wrong grave, and this isn't actually the people we're looking for. Maybe it's a hoax. Let's assume it is the correct grave. That means we're missing 2 of the 11 people on the list. How do we figure out who's missing? Well, there's a pretty easy process of elimination we can use to figure out who's not in the grave. I think you'll be surprised. All we need to do is look at the skeletons. Here we have a diagram of each of the 9 skeletons that were found in the grave. I'm going to click on skeleton 9, for example. You can learn a lot about someone from looking at their skeletal remains, how old they were when they died, approximately, if they were male or female. So we're going to look at markers including wisdom teeth, which will indicate age, approximate age, rings on vertebrae, we'll talk about what that means, which also approximates age, and then the pelvis or the hip bone, which will tell us if these people were male or female. So this is skeleton 9's teeth. And what I want to know is if skeleton 9 has wisdom teeth. There's a little key here. And it looks like if someone has wisdom teeth, that means they're probably about 22 years of age or older. They're adults. If they don't have wisdom teeth, that means they're probably 21 years of age or younger. These are the last molars to grow into our mouths as adults. So they're very good markers of age. It looks like skeleton 9 has wisdom teeth, so I'm going to click yes. I'm right. So this person's an adult. This already eliminates several possible identities. This couldn't be Alexei. This couldn't be Maria, who was 19. So I'm narrowing it down already. The vertebrae is the next bone we're going to look at. And vertebrae are the bones that stack up in our spines. And it turns out when you're under the age of 18, between your vertebrae, there are these little floating discs. And when you turn 18, those discs fuse or attach to the vertebrae. Interesting. So we have a picture of skeleton 9's vertebrae here, and there's a key beside again. So if there are rings on the vertebrae because those discs have fused, that person's 18 or older. No rings under 18. This person definitely has a bony ring around the outside edge of the vertebrae, so I'm going to click yes. Now I know what you're thinking. That wasn't very helpful. I get it. We already knew this person was over 18 because of the wisdom teeth. But there are some people in this grave who are between the ages of 18 and 21 who might have those rings but not yet have the wisdom teeth. So for some people, it could be useful. Let's look at the pelvis, the hip bone. So it's right here. And if we look at the key, you'll see the female pelvis is much wider than the male pelvis. That's for giving birth. This is definitely a female. So skeleton 9 is an adult female. I'm going to go back to the list here. Who could this be? So it looks like this could be Alexandra, the mother, could be the nurse. It could be Olga also. She was 22 years of age, so she would probably have those wisdom teeth also. So we've narrowed it down from 11 possible identities to 3 possible identities just by looking at the bones. So let's go back to my skeletons. I'm going to show you all the same information on wisdom teeth, vertebrae, and pelvis for each of the 9 skeletons. We'll save a little bit of time here. So we have skeletons 1 through 9. Oops, sorry. Skeleton 1's information, skeleton 2, 3, and all the way through 9. You can see it says yes or no for the presence of wisdom teeth, yes or no for rings on vertebrae, and here's male or female. So if we count up the males and females, let's start there. You'll see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 females, and that means there are 1, 2, 3, 4 males. We're definitely missing 1 male and 1 female. The next interesting thing is the vertebrae. And for a lot of people, this is a game changer. It's the same for everyone. Everyone in the grave had rings on their vertebrae, which means everyone in the grave was 18 or older. Now, let's go back to the list. Why is this important? This means that there are 2 people who could not have been in this grave. 2 people under the age of 18. That would be Alexei, who was almost 14, and Anastasia, who was 17. The 2 youngest are clearly not in the grave, and this is what scientists discovered in 1991 right away. The 2 children were missing. Now, I'm sure the wheels are turning and you're thinking, oh my goodness, of course Anastasia's missing, because Anna Anderson was telling the truth all this time. Well, we don't know that yet. Let's work through the evidence we do have. So we know that she's not in the grave. But do we know yet if this is actually the grave of the royal family? Have we proven that any of these people are actually the Romanovs? Not yet. So to do that, the next step was to extract DNA from the bones and use that DNA to prove that some of these people, at least, were part of the royal family. The DNA that was extracted was from a part of the cell called the mitochondria. Sometimes it's called the powerhouse of the cell because it makes energy. Most of our DNA is found inside the nucleus of the cell. That's where the DNA that makes up all of the genes that determine your traits like hair color and eye color are stored. And that DNA, half is from mom and half is from dad. Every sibling in a family inherits their own unique combination of genetic information from a mother and a father that's always housed inside the nucleus. In this case, the mitochondrial DNA was used instead. There's one little piece of DNA inside the mitochondria, and its inheritance is interesting. So mitochondrial DNA is not a combination of genes from 2 parents, unique in every child. It's one piece of DNA that's inherited maternally. It comes from mom. And in fact, it's an exact copy of mom's. It stays the same from one generation to the next. And as a result, can be used to trace generations of relatedness. So take a look at this little pedigree or family tree. I'll show you how it works. All the squares on this tree represent males in the family, and all the circles represent females. The lines all mean things too. So if there's a line like this between 2 people, that means there's a union between them. And then from the union come their offspring. So here's a grandmother and a grandfather. They have 2 children, a son and a daughter. And the son has a union, the daughter has a union, and then they produce offspring or grandchildren. I'm going to click play. The grandmother's mitochondrial DNA is passed to her children and then on to some of her grandchildren, but not all of her grandchildren. So let's review. Her mitochondrial DNA gets passed on to all of her children. So they match each other, they match their mother. This son, if he were to have children, his children would match his wife and their profile from her family. But her daughter will pass on that same mitochondrial DNA to the next generation of children. This daughter, if she were to grow up and have children, would continue to pass on that mitochondrial DNA. So there are people in every generation of this family with the same exact mitochondrial DNA. It doesn't matter if many generations have passed, the DNA will still match. And that's why it's useful for the mystery of Anastasia. Don't forget, the people in the grave were buried 75 years ago. So if I want to compare their DNA to a relative who's still alive, many generations of time, or much time, will have passed. Let's take a look. So this is a family tree for the Tsarina's side of the family. Here's Alexandra, and here's Nicholas, and here are their 5 lovely children. So this is the Russian royal family. Here's Queen Victoria, who was the Queen of England in the 1800s, and her husband, Prince Albert. Here's their children. This is Anastasia's grandmother, Alice, who had 6 children, one of whom was Alexandra. So these are Anastasia's aunts and uncles, maternal on her mom's side. These are her first cousins, and then first cousins once removed. The oldest people are always on the top, and the youngest people are always on the bottom of a pedigree like this. I'm going to click play, and we'll see Queen Victoria's mitochondrial DNA being passed through several generations. A lot of people on this family tree have the same mitochondrial DNA as Queen Victoria. Now, there are also a lot of people missing from this tree. To save space, we put the important people to our story. So Queen Victoria's mitochondrial DNA was passed to her daughter Alice. Alice passed it on to her daughter Alexandra. Alexandra passed it on to Anastasia and her siblings. Now, we think that some of these people are in the grave. Alexandra, Nicholas, and the 3 older sisters should be there. We've determined that Anastasia and Alexei are missing, so we'll come back to them later. Nicholas, unfortunately, does not have the same mitochondrial DNA as the rest of these people because he's from a different family. We'd have to look at his family tree to find a match for him. So let's focus on Alexandra and her 3 daughters, all females. All we need to do now is find someone in the extended family out here whose DNA will match theirs to identify if they're in the grave. In 1991, Prince Philip's DNA was used for this task. If you don't know who Prince Philip is, his wife is Queen Elizabeth, the Queen of England. His grandsons are William and Harry, a very famous family. He provided a sample of DNA that could be used to identify if Alexandra, Olga, Tatiana, and Maria were in the grave. So what we're going to do now is look at the real DNA. We're going to compare Prince Philip's DNA to just the females in the grave. Those females should be mother and daughters. Let's see if it works out. What we're looking at now is called an alignment. An alignment is a tool that we can use to compare many people's DNA or many different living things' DNA all at the same time. So in this alignment, we have DNA sequence from skeletons 3, 5, 6, 7, and 9. Those are the female skeletons in the grave. Now, one of them should be Alexandra. 3 of them should be the daughters. There's one more female in the grave. Do you remember who that is? There was a nurse on that list too. So there's one female in this grave who was not part of the family. Remember that. And then we have Prince Philip's DNA. Now what we're looking at here is a series of letters representing the bases in their DNA. There are 4 bases in the DNA of all living things. Adenine, A, thymine, T, guanine, G, and cytosine, C. So these letters represent these chemical bases that are in a specific sequence in each of these people's mitochondrial DNA. When we perform an alignment, we're comparing the order or sequence of those bases. If you look right here in position number 1, everyone has a C. In position 2, everyone has a T. In position 3, everyone has a G. In fact, a lot of their DNA sequences match no matter who you're looking at. But if we scroll down a little bit, what this program does is it highlights positions where there's at least one person whose base is different. So right here is a position where we have T, 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 C, T. One person has a C, that would be skeleton 9. Everyone else, including Prince Philip and these 4 females, have a T. It looks like maybe skeleton 9 might not be related to the others. Let's see if there are any other spots where this occurs. Ooh, there's a few more. All right, C, 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 T, C. Again, skeleton 9 has a T. Everyone else has a C. Here's another one, A, G, A. Everyone has an A here, including Prince Philip, but skeleton 9 has a G. Are you noticing the pattern that I'm noticing? Every time the computer tells me someone's not matching, it's skeleton 9 who's not matching. So what does that mean about skeleton 9? If you said she's not related to the others, you're right. Her DNA profile is different. We have several locations. We have 5 so far where she has a different base than everyone else. So it looks like skeleton 9 isn't related to the others, which means if we were to go back to the list, who do you think she is or was? I would agree. She's the nurse. So it looks like we've identified skeleton 9. That was pretty easy. And what about the other females? Their DNA consistently matches Prince Philip. So what does that mean about them? They're definitely his relatives. Based on the fact that they're female and we have their approximate ages, it looks like we've identified Alexandra and the 3 older sisters, Maria, Tatiana, and Olga. So we know now that we definitely have the right grave. Could we identify the Tsar's body in the same way? We sure could. We just need to find a different reference. So we can't compare him to Prince Philip. Let's look at the Tsar's family tree. So this is Tsar Nicholas II. And let's see who in the family has the same mitochondrial DNA as he does. Again, it's a lot of people, but the trick in this case was finding someone who was still living to compare to the remains from the grave. So this is the reference sample that was used. It was from Countess Xenia. I'm going to take you to the alignment now. This should be easier this time. And now we're looking at the male skeletons. So one of these male skeletons is the Tsar. Who were the others? It was the doctor, and there were 2 servants. So 3 of these male skeletons are not part of the Tsar's family. One of them is the Tsar. So we want to see which one of these male skeletons matches the Countess. And again, a lot of their DNA is the same. That's simply because they're humans. We share a lot of the same DNA. Let's scroll down a little bit and see if we can find some differences. Ooh. All right, so Countess Xenia has a C. So does skeleton 4. The others have T's in this position. So it looks like skeleton 4 might be the one. Oh, do you see the N over here? What does that mean? There's no N's in DNA. When the DNA was being sequenced, what this means is that that position, the base couldn't be read. So a computer program inserted an N because it didn't know what the base was. That whole position gets highlighted in gray, and I don't use it for anything because I don't know skeleton 4 sequence at that spot. So I ignore the N's. I'm going to scroll down and look for some more yellow. This is funny. So look here, Countess Xenia has a C, and in this spot, there's a bunch of people who have C's, and this person has a T. Let's see here. Well, this looks just like the first difference we saw. Countess Xenia matches skeleton 4, but doesn't match skeletons 8, 1, or 2. And if we were to go all the way through, we'd see that same thing often. Skeleton 4 is the only skeleton who always matches the Countess Xenia. So if skeleton 4 is the only male skeleton who matches the Countess, that means he must be her relative. And skeleton 4 is the Tsar. He has the same DNA profile as she does. So we definitely know we have the right grave, and we know exactly which people in the grave are members of the royal family. Can we use mitochondrial DNA to answer any other unanswered questions about the royal family? How about this little problem? So for a long time, decades, Anna Anderson claimed to be Anastasia Romanov. There wasn't enough evidence produced for the courts or to the family to prove with certainty that she was being truthful, but could DNA solve this for us now? If we can get Anna Anderson's mitochondrial DNA and compare it to Prince Philip like we did for the rest of the members of the family, we could use it to prove if she really is Anastasia. If her DNA profile matches Prince Philip's, that means she was a member of the royal family. What if it turns out she's not a member of the royal family and her DNA does not match Prince Philip's? Could we also use mitochondrial DNA to investigate that interesting story about Franziska, the Polish factory worker who disappeared from her boarding house in Berlin in 1920? Yeah, all we'd need to do is find a relative of Franziska's, probably in Poland, whose mitochondrial DNA profile would match. That's exactly what was done in 1991. A relative of Franziska's, Karl Maucher, was identified, and he very generously gave a sample of his DNA to be used in the investigation. So what we're going to do now is look at Anna Anderson's DNA profile, mitochondrial DNA profile, and compare it to Prince Philip's and to Karl from Poland. Hopefully, she'll match one of them and we'll have some closure. If she doesn't match either of these people, we may not be any further in this story than we were before. All we'll know is that she was lying. How do we get Anna Anderson's DNA? She did die about 10 years before this analysis was conducted. And unfortunately, her body was cremated, which means burned to ashes. A bit of an obstacle. Luckily, her husband had saved a lock of her hair, and there was also a tissue sample in a hospital freezer from a procedure she had before she died. I think it was a piece of intestine. So there were two sources of Anna Anderson's DNA that could be used for this study. Well, are you ready? I'm going to click forward to the analysis. And we've done this twice now, so it should be much easier. What we're looking at now is Anna Anderson's DNA sequence, Karl from Poland, and Prince Philip on the bottom. And again, just like all the others, a lot of their DNA is the same. I'm going to scroll down. Let's see if we can find some yellow. All right, now have a look at the yellow here. What is the DNA telling us about Anna Anderson's relationship to these people? Right away, I see something important. In both of these positions, Anna Anderson has a C and Prince Philip has a T. I'm going to go down a little bit more and see if there's any more yellow. Again, Anna Anderson has a T, Prince Philip has a C. Anna Anderson has a C, Prince Philip has a T. That's 4 positions where I've noticed that her DNA sequence is different than Prince Philip's. What does it mean? She was not telling the truth. Anna Anderson was not related to Prince Philip and clearly could not have been the Grand Duchess Anastasia. This was a shock to a lot of people who really believed that she was telling the truth. But the DNA doesn't lie. Anna Anderson was not Anastasia. Does this tell us who she really was? Well, if we look closely, what we'll see over and over again is that her DNA is exactly the same as Karl Maucher from Poland. Her profile matches his. They're related. So that article that came out in the paper in Berlin in the 1920s was actually spot on. It looks like Anna Anderson was really Franziska. She was that Polish factory worker. And for the majority of her life, was lying about her identity. Now, we can't ask her why she was lying. Some people think that she had really convinced herself that it was true. And in the end, she really believed that she was the princess, even though that maybe in the beginning she knew that she wasn't. But we have a little bit of closure here with the DNA. We know now that the family did indeed die during the Russian Revolution. And we know that Anna Anderson was not a member of the royal family. An amazing story. Now, I bet some of you are wondering where Anastasia wound up. A second grave was found years after the first grave in Siberia, very close to the original grave. And in the grave, the remains of Anastasia and her brother Alexei were found. Their remains had mitochondrial DNA that matched the family profile, meaning Prince Philip's, exactly. So everyone did indeed die in 1918. It just took a little bit longer to find a couple of the bodies. What a fantastic story. I hope that you enjoyed learning how to use DNA to identify people and learning a little bit of Russian history. It was a pleasure to have you here today. Bye-bye.